Mankind was quiet for 3 centuries, and then we came back. Part 1. The silence the stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what was out there. They dreamed of other worlds, other beings, other civilizations. They built telescopes to see farther. They built rockets to fly higher. And finally, after centuries of dreaming, they built ships that could carry them to the stars. The Voyager 3 probe was humanity's proudest achievement. It was small, no bigger than a car, but it carried the hopes of an entire species. Scientists launched it from Earth's orbit in the year 2157, aimed at a distant star system that showed signs of planets that might support life. The probe would take decades to arrive, but humanity was patient. They had waited this long. They could wait a little longer. They never got the chance. The probe drifted through the darkness of space for 3 years before it crossed an invisible line. On one side of that line was empty space. On the other side was territory claimed by the hegemony. The hegemony was old. It had existed for 12,000 years, a confederation of 12 spacefaring species that had spread across a quarter of the galaxy. They had seen countless younger races rise and fall. They had watched primitive civilizations discover fire, then tools, then cities, then starships. And they had learned, over thousands of years, that the best time to deal with a potential rival was before it became one. When their sensors detected the Voyager 3 probe, they did not celebrate the discovery of new intelligent life. They did not send a greeting. They simply traced the probe's path backward through space until they found its origin point, a small yellow star with 8 planets, the third of which was blue and green and covered with the electromagnetic noise of a young technological civilization. The Hegemony Council met for less than an hour. The decision was quick and simple. They had seen this story before. A young species reaches for the stars, makes contact with older civilizations, and then spends the next few centuries trying to catch up. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes they became threats. It was easier, the council agreed, to prevent the problem before it started. They sent a fleet. The humans detected the approaching ships when they were still 2 days away from Earth. Scientists stared at their screens in disbelief. Governments argued about what to do. Some wanted to send messages of peace. Others wanted to prepare for war. In the end, they did both. The messages of peace went unanswered. The war lasted 11 days. Earth's defenses were impressive by human standards. Orbital stations bristled with weapons. Fleets of warships patrolled the space between Earth and Mars. Millions of soldiers stood ready to defend their homes. Humanity had prepared for this moment, had dreamed of it, and feared it in equal measure. None of it mattered. The hegemony fleet numbered only 37 ships, but each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. Their weapons fired beams of energy that cut through human warships like sunlight through fog. Their shields absorbed everything humanity threw at them without so much as a flicker. In the first hour of battle, humanity lost half its fleet. By the end of the first day, they had lost everything in orbit. Then the bombardment began. The hegemony did not target military bases. They targeted cities: Beijing, New York, London, Mumbai, Sao Paulo. One by one, the great centers of human civilization vanished in pillars of fire that rose from the surface and punched through the atmosphere. The night side of Earth glowed with the light of burning cities. Billions of people died in the first 3 days. Billions more would die in the weeks that followed, from radiation and fire and the collapse of civilization. On the 11th day, the hegemony stopped. They did not land troops. They did not demand surrender. They did not even attempt to communicate with the survivors crawling through the ruins of their world. They simply turned their ships around and left. But they left something behind: the quarantine. was a network of thousands of automated weapons platforms, scattered throughout the solar system like seeds thrown across a garden. Each platform was small, no larger than a house, but packed with sensors and weapons far beyond anything humanity could match. They were programmed with a simple directive: destroy anything that tried to leave. The message was clear. Humanity was not worth conquering. They were not worth enslaving. They were not even worth talking to. They were simply a problem to be contained, a nuisance to be forgotten. The hegemony had built the quarantine and then moved on to more important matters. Confident that the primitive apes trapped in their little solar system would never trouble anyone again. For the survivors on Earth, the first years after the war were a nightmare. Governments had collapsed. Cities were radioactive ruins. Food was scarce, and clean water was scarcer. Billions had died in the bombardment, and millions more died in the chaos that followed. Humanity, which had dreamed of reaching the stars, was reduced to fighting over the scraps of its own civilization. But humanity did not die in the ashes of the old world. New leaders emerged. They were not politicians or generals, but engineers and scientists, farmers and builders. They gathered the survivors together and began the long, slow work of rebuilding. It took a generation just to restore basic services to the surviving population. It took another generation to rebuild the cities, to replant the forests, to clean the poison from the air and water. And through it all, the quarantine satellites watched from the darkness, silent and patient, waiting for any sign that humanity might try to escape. The first generation after the war mourned. They had seen the world burn. They had lost everyone and everything they loved. Many of them could not speak of what had happened without tears. They passed their grief to their children like inheritance, a weight that pressed down on every human heart. The second generation did not mourn. They raged. They looked up at the sky and saw not stars, but prison bars. They cursed the hegemony with every breath. They swore revenge, though they had no idea how to achieve it. Their anger burned hot and bright, a fire that threatened to consume them. But the third generation was different. They did not mourn, and they did not rage. They planned. They understood something that their parents and grandparents had been too hurt to see. Anger was not enough. Grief was not enough. If humanity wanted to survive, if they wanted to be free, they would need to become something more than they had been. They would need to grow stronger, smarter, more patient than they had ever been before. And so the long night began. Mankind was quiet for 3 centuries, and then we came back part 2. The long night, the quarantine satellites were patient. They did not sleep. They did not grow bored. They simply watched, year after year, decade after decade, waiting for humanity to make a mistake. In the first century after the war, humanity made many mistakes. A group of survivors on Mars tried to build a ship that could slip past the satellites. They worked in secret for 15 years, hiding their project in the deep tunnels beneath the Martian surface. When the ship finally launched, it made it less than 1,000,000 kilometers before the satellites destroyed it. There were no survivors. A decade later, a brilliant scientist claimed she had found a way to block the satellite sensors. She convinced 1,000 people to follow her on a fleet of small ships, each one wrapped in her supposedly invisible shielding. The satellites detected them before they even reached the orbit of Jupiter. The scientist's last transmission was a scream that cut off mid-breath. After that, humanity stopped trying to escape, but they did not stop working. The hegemony had made a mistake of their own. When they built the quarantine, they programmed the satellites to watch for ships trying to leave the solar system. They did not program them to watch for ships moving within it. Why would they? A species trapped in a single star system was no threat to anyone. Let them spread to their dead moon and their red neighbor. Let them play in their cosmic sandbox. It did not matter. And so humanity spread. Mars was first. The survivors there had nothing left to lose, and they threw themselves into the work of making their planet livable. They built domes over their cities, filled them with air, and planted gardens that grew green and lush in the Martian soil. Within 2 generations, Mars was home to 50 million people. Venus came next. The surface was too hot for humans, but the clouds were just right. Engineers built floating cities that drifted through the thick atmosphere, harvesting chemicals from the air and energy from the sun. It was a strange way to live, suspended forever between the burning surface below and the cold darkness above, but humans adapted. They always adapted. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn followed. Europa, with its vast underground oceans. Titan, with its lakes of liquid methane. Ganymede, Callisto, and Enceladus. Everywhere there was water, humans found a way to survive. Everywhere there was energy, humans built homes. The asteroid belt became the heart of human industry. Millions of rocks, each one rich with metals and minerals, drifted through the void between Mars and Jupiter. Mining ships crawled across their surfaces, extracting everything useful and shipping it back to the inner planets. Factory stations turned raw ore into tools and machines, and ships docked by the end of the 1st century. Humanity was no longer a species clinging to one wounded planet. They were a solar civilization spread across dozens of worlds and stations, with a population climbing back toward the billions dot, and still, the quarantined satellites watched. And still, humanity seemed content to stay in their cage. The hegemony forgot about them. This was exactly what humanity wanted. The secret began on a small asteroid called 1847 Veritas, deep in the outer belt. On the surface, it was just another mining operation, a handful of domes and tunnels where a few hundred workers extracted iron and nickel. But beneath the surface, in chambers carved from solid rock, the real work was happening. The wreckage of the first contact war had not all been destroyed. Pieces of hegemony ships had fallen to Earth, to Mars, to the moons of the outer planets. Most of it was too damaged to be useful, but some pieces were intact enough to study. On Veritas, the greatest minds of humanity gathered to take those pieces apart and understand them. It was slow work. The hegemony's technology was thousands of years ahead of anything humanity had developed. Their computers used principles that human scientists did not even have names for. Their materials were stronger, lighter, and more flexible than anything humanity could produce. Their energy systems seemed to violate laws of physics that humans had believed were unbreakable. But humans were good at learning. The first breakthrough came 73 years after the war, when a young physicist named James Okonkwo figured out how hegemony shields worked. He spent the next decade building a better version. His shields were not just as good as the hegemony's. They were better. The second breakthrough came 12 years later, when a team of engineers finally understood the hegemony's propulsion systems. The hegemony used engines that bent space itself, allowing their ships to travel faster than light. Humanity had dreamed of such engines for centuries. Now they knew how to build them, but they did not build them. Not yet. Instead, they kept working. They improved. They refined. They took what the hegemony had built over thousands of years and made it better in decades. Human scientists did not just copy hegemony technology. They understood it deeply enough to see its flaws, and then they fixed those flaws. The hegemony had grown comfortable. They had been the most advanced civilization in the galaxy for so long that they had stopped pushing forward. Why innovate when you were already on top? Why struggle when everything was easy? Humanity had no such luxury. They were prisoners fighting for their freedom. Every advantage mattered. Every improvement could mean the difference between victory and extinction. In hidden bases scattered throughout the solar system, human engineers built weapons that the hegemony could not imagine. They developed ships that were faster, stronger, and more deadly than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They created technologies that would have seemed like magic to the species that had tried to destroy them, and they waited in the second century of the long night. Humanity began to send out spies. The probes were tiny, no larger than grains of sand. They were made of materials that hegemony sensors could not detect, powered by energy sources that left no signature. One by one, they slipped through the gaps in the quarantine and drifted out into the galaxy. The probes sent back everything they saw: the locations of hegemony worlds, the routes of their trading ships, the structure of their government, the disposition of their fleets. Humanity built a map of their enemy's territory, more detailed and accurate than anything the hegemony itself possessed. They learned that the hegemony was not as strong as it appeared. 12 species, each with their own interests and ambitions, held together by tradition and mutual suspicion rather than genuine unity. Dozens of other species lived under their rule, conquered or intimidated into submission. The hegemony kept order through overwhelming force, but that force was spread thin across a quarter of the galaxy. Humanity learned something else too. They learned that they had not been forgotten entirely. The hegemony kept records of the war, buried in their archives. Most citizens had never heard of Earth or humans, but in the deep files of their military computers, humanity was still listed as a potential threat, to be monitored and contained. The quarantine was not just a cage. It was a reminder. The hegemony knew, on some level, that they had not killed humanity. They had only delayed them. By the end of the 3rd century, humanity was ready. The fleet they had built was not large. Only 300 ships, hidden in bases throughout the outer solar system. But each ship was worth 100 hegemony vessels. Each weapon was designed to exploit every weakness the probes had discovered. The last meeting of the Human Unity Council took place on Earth. In a chamber built beneath the ruins of New York, leaders from every human world and station gathered to make the final decision. There was no debate, no arguments, no dissent. 300 years of patience, 300 years of work, 300 years of waiting. It was time to remind the galaxy that humanity still existed. Mankind was quiet for 3 centuries, and then we came. That Part 3. The Return Admiral Chun Wei-lin stood on the bridge of the HSS Remembrance and looked out at the stars. She was 62 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. Her great-great-grandmother had died in the bombardment of Shanghai, one of billions who had burned when the hegemony came to Earth. Every generation of her family since had served in the military that humanity built in secret, waiting for the day they would finally strike back. That day had come. Around her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Their parents had trained for it. Their grandparents had dreamed of it. 300 years of preparation, 300 years of sacrifice, all leading to this single point in time. The fleet hung in the darkness beyond Neptune. 300 ships that represented everything humanity had learned in their long imprisonment. They did not look like the blocky, practical vessels that humanity had built before the war. These ships were sleek and beautiful, their hulls made of materials that seemed to drink in light. They carried weapons that human scientists had spent generations perfecting, and they were about to do something impossible. The hegemony's faster-than-light technology worked by bending space, creating a bubble that allowed ships to travel faster than the speed of light. It was good technology, refined over thousands of years. But human engineers had not just copied it. They had improved it beyond anything the hegemony could imagine. Where hegemony ships took days to cross between stars, human ships could do it in hours. Where hegemony ships needed to slow down and navigate carefully through deep space, human ships could arrive exactly where they wanted. With precision measured in meters. Admiral Chung gave the order. The stars stretched and twisted. And then they were somewhere else entirely. The planet below them was called HFY Prime. It was the administrative heart of the hegemony, a world covered in gleaming cities and ancient monuments. Trillions of beings lived on its surface and in the orbital stations that surrounded it. Ships came and went constantly, carrying goods and passengers and messages from across a quarter of the galaxy. None of them had expected visitors from Earth. For a long moment, nothing happened. The human fleet simply hung in space, 300 ships arranged in perfect formation, waiting. On HFY Prime and its stations, sensors screamed warnings that no one understood. Unknown ships had appeared from nowhere. Unknown technology was flooding every frequency with signals that made no sense. Something impossible was happening. Admiral Chun opened a channel and spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, broadcast on every frequency the hegemony used. Her words were translated instantly into 12 languages, reaching every ship and station and city in the system. This is Admiral Chun Wei-Lin of the Human Unity Fleet. 300 years ago, you came to our home. You killed our people. You burned our cities. You caged our world and left us to die. And then you forgot about us. She paused, letting the words sink in. We did not forget. This is not an invasion. We are not here to conquer you or destroy you. We are here to deliver a message and make a demand. The quarantine ends today. You will dismantle it yourselves, or we will do it for you. You have one solar cycle to decide. The channel closed. On HFY Prime, chaos erupted. The Hegemony Council had not met in emergency session for 3 centuries. Now they scrambled to their chamber, demanding answers that no one could give. How had the humans escaped the quarantine? How had they developed such technology? How had they traveled so far so fast? Most importantly, what were they going to do about it? Some council members urged caution. The humans had not attacked yet. Perhaps diplomacy was possible. Perhaps this was all a bluff, a desperate gamble by a dying species trying to negotiate their freedom. Others argued for immediate assault. The humans had only 300 ships. The hegemony could summon 3,000 from the surrounding sectors. Yes, the humans had clearly developed some impressive technology, but numbers still mattered. Crush them now, before they could spread or escape or cause more trouble. The argument lasted less than an hour. In the end, the war faction won. The hegemony had not survived for 12,000 years by negotiating with threats. They had survived by destroying them. The order went out to every fleet within range. Converge on HFY Prime and annihilate the human invaders. Admiral Chun watched the enemy ships arrive. They came from every direction, jumping in from a dozen different systems. Hegemony warships in every shape and size, bristling with weapons that had crushed 100 species over the millennia. When the last of them arrived, more than 2,000 vessels faced the human fleet. The hegemony commander sent a message of his own. Human vessels, you are surrounded. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated with mercy. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have no chance of victory. Accept reality. Admiral Chun smiled. It was not a kind smile. You had your chance for peace, she said. 300 years ago, you could have talked to us. You could have welcomed us into the galaxy. You could have been friends instead of murderers. You chose to burn our world instead. Now we will show you what we learned in the dark. The Battle of HFY Prime lasted 6 minutes. Later, historians would try to explain what happened. They would study the sensor logs and debris fields and try to understand how 300 ships had destroyed 2,000. They would interview survivors and analyze weapon signatures and write long papers, full of technical language. But the truth was simple. Humanity had spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment. The hegemony had spent 3 centuries growing soft and lazy. When the two sides finally met, the result was not a battle. It was a demonstration that human weapons cut through hegemony shields like they were not there. Human ships moved so fast that hegemony targeting systems could not track them. Human defenses absorbed everything the enemy threw at them without taking damage thought in 6 minutes. 90% of the hegemony fleet was destroyed. The remaining 10% fled in every direction, spreading the news of what had happened to every corner of the galaxy. 3 human ships were damaged. None were destroyed. When it was over, Admiral Chun broadcast again. Her voice was still calm, but now there was steel in it. You now have 23 hours to dismantle the quarantine. If you refuse, we will do it ourselves. And then we will have a longer conversation about the future of this galaxy. Choose wisely. The message ended. On Kethver Prime, the Hegemony Council met again. This time, there was no debate. No arguments. No war faction demanding immediate action. They had just watched their greatest fleet be destroyed in 6 minutes. They had just learned that the primitive species they had caged 3 centuries ago had become something terrifying. They had just realized that everything they believed about their place in the universe was wrong. 12 hours later, the order went out to dismantle the quarantine. The cage was opening. Humanity was free. Mankind was quiet for 3 centuries, and then we came back part 4. The Reckoning. The news spread across the galaxy like fire. On 1,000 worlds, beings of every shape and size watched. Recordings of the Battle of Kethver Prime. They saw the human fleet appear from nowhere. They saw the mighty hegemony armada gather to destroy them. They saw that armada reduced to debris in 6 minutes. And they saw something else. Something that changed everything. They saw hope. For 12,000 years, the hegemony had ruled this quarter of the galaxy. They had not always been cruel, but they had always been dominant. Species that cooperated were rewarded. Species that resisted were crushed. There was no alternative. There was no escape. The hegemony was simply too powerful to challenge. Now, a species that should have been dead was proving that wrong. The first delegation arrived at Sol 3 weeks after the battle. They called themselves the Vethkai, and they were masters of engineering. Their bodies were thin and fragile, with 4 arms and large eyes adapted for working in dim light. For 6,000 years, they had served the hegemony, building the ships and stations and machines that kept the empire running. In return, they were allowed to live, but they were never free. Their children were taken to hegemony schools and raised to be loyal. Their innovations were claimed by their masters. Their history was slowly being erased. The Vethkai ambassador knelt before Admiral Chun and begged for weapons. "We have watched the recordings 1,000 times," she said. "We have analyzed your technology and seen how far beyond us you are. Give us this power, and we will fight beside you. Together, we can destroy the hegemony forever." Admiral Chun looked at the kneeling ambassador for a long moment. Then she reached down and gently raised the Vethkai to her feet. "Stand up," she said. "No one kneels to humanity. We are not the hegemony. We will not give you weapons." The ambassador's face fell. "Then you mean to keep your power for yourselves. You will become the new masters of the galaxy." "No," Admiral Chun said. "We mean to give you something more valuable than weapons. We mean to give you knowledge." She led the ambassador to a window that looked out on the rebuilt skyline of New York. The city gleamed in the afternoon sun. Towers of glass and steel rising from the ashes of what had been destroyed 3 centuries ago. 300 years ago, we were broken. Our world was burned. Our people were dying. The hegemony thought they had killed us, and for a while, we thought so too. But we rebuilt. We learned. We grew stronger than we had ever been before. Weapons can be taken away. They can be captured, destroyed, turned against you. But knowledge lives forever. Once you understand something truly, no one can take that understanding from you. We will teach you what we learned in our long night. We will show you how to build your own weapons, your own ships, your own future. It will take time. It will be hard. But when you are finished, you will be free. Not because we gave you freedom, but because you earned it yourselves. The Vethkai ambassador was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "This is not what we expected," she said. "But perhaps it is what we need." The Vethkai were only the first. Over the following months, delegations arrived from across the galaxy. Some came openly, declaring their support for humanity and their desire to learn. Others came in secret, afraid of what the hegemony might do if they were discovered. The chorus came. They were a hive mind, millions of individuals sharing a single consciousness through a network of organic signals. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had held their queens hostage, controlling the entire species through a handful of prisoners. They did not ask for weapons. They asked for help freeing their mothers. The Drell came. They had been warriors once, proud and fierce, with traditions that stretched back tens of thousands of years. The hegemony had conquered them through trickery rather than force, taking their leaders and turning them into puppets. Now the Drell served as shock troops, dying in hegemony wars while their culture slowly faded away. They asked for the chance to fight again, this time for themselves. Dozens of other species came, each with their own story of oppression and loss. Some had been conquered openly. Others had been manipulated, threatened, bribed, or simply ground down over centuries until they forgot what freedom felt like. To each of them, humanity offered this same thing. Not weapons, but teachers. Not power, but knowledge. Not freedom given, but freedom earned. The hegemony watched all of this with growing fear. They had expected humanity to attack. They had prepared defenses, gathered fleets, fortified their most important worlds. A straightforward war they could understand, even if they could not win it. But this was something different. This was something far more dangerous. Humanity was not conquering the galaxy. They were inspiring it. Every species that joined the humans became a little stronger, a little more confident, a little more willing to stand against hegemony authority. Every piece of knowledge shared was another brick removed from the foundations of hegemony power. The empire was not being destroyed. It was being made irrelevant. Some hegemony leaders wanted to strike first, to destroy humanity before it was too late. But they remembered the Battle of Kethver Prime. They remembered what 6 minutes had cost them. And they were afraid. Others argued for compromise. Perhaps the hegemony could reform, become something better, adapt to the new reality. But 12,000 years of tradition was hard to change. Too many powerful beings had too much invested in the old ways. In the end, the hegemony did nothing. They watched as their subject species grew stronger. They watched as their authority crumbled. They watched as the galaxy they had ruled for millennia slipped through their fingers like sand. Admiral Chun gave her final address as fleet commander on the first anniversary of the return. She stood in the same chamber where the Human Unity Council had voted to break the quarantine, surrounded by leaders from Earth and Mars and Venus and all the scattered homes humanity had built during their long imprisonment. But now there were other faces in the crowd too. Vethkai engineers, Chorus representatives, Drell warriors, a dozen other species, all standing together. 1 year ago, we reminded the galaxy that humanity existed, she said. We proved that we had not died, had not given up, had not forgotten. We broke the chains that held us and stepped into the light. We could have used our power to conquer. We could have become exactly what the hegemony was, masters ruling over slaves. Some said we should. Some said we had earned the right to revenge. But we remembered what revenge had cost us. We remembered the burned cities and the dead billions. We remembered what it felt like to be powerless, to be caged, to be forgotten. And we decided that we would not create more of that pain. We would end it. The galaxy is changing. Species that were slaves are becoming free. Species that were enemies are becoming friends. This is not our doing alone. We lit the spark, but the fire belongs to everyone willing to carry it. Humanity spent 300 years in darkness. We learned that darkness does not have to make you cruel. It can make you strong. It can make you wise. It can make you determined to bring light to others. That is our gift to the galaxy. Not weapons. Not conquest. Hope. She paused, looking out at the crowd, human and alien faces alike, all watching her with the same expression. We were quiet for 3 centuries. We will not be quiet again. But when we speak now, it will not be to threaten or demand. It will be to teach, to share, to build. This is the reckoning. Not a war to be won, but a future to be made. Let us make it together. Mankind was quiet for 3 centuries, and then we came back, part 5. The new dawn. 50 years had passed since the returned. Ambassador Chen Weilin was 93 years old now. Her hair white as snow and her face lined with decades of work and worry. But her eyes were still sharp, her mind still clear, and her voice still carried the same quiet authority that had once commanded fleets. She stood at the window of her quarters on Station Unity, looking out at a galaxy transformed. The station itself was a symbol of everything that had changed. It hung in neutral space between 3 star systems, a massive structure that had been built by a dozen species working together. Humans had designed the frame. Vethkai had built the engines. The chorus had grown the life support systems. 100 other species had contributed something, each adding their own knowledge and skill to the whole. Once, such cooperation would have been impossible. The hegemony had kept species separate, suspicious of each other, dependent on their masters. Now they were learning to trust. It was not easy. 50 years was not long enough to undo 12,000 years of division. Old hatred still burned in some hearts. Old fears still lingered. There were setbacks and failures, moments when it seemed like the whole project might fall apart. But it did not fall apart. Every year, more species joined. Every year, the bonds grew stronger. Every year, the galaxy moved a little closer to something that had never existed before. True equality among the stars. The hegemony still existed, but it was a shadow of what it had been. 3 of the original 12 species had left entirely, joining the new order that was rising around them. The remaining 9 had been forced to change their ways, abandoning their subject species and their dreams of dominance. They were still powerful, still wealthy, still influential, but they were no longer masters. Some had adapted well. They had discovered that cooperation could be profitable, that sharing knowledge led to more innovation than hoarding it. They had found new purpose in a galaxy where strength was no longer the only currency that mattered. Others had not adapted at all. They clung to their old ways, dreaming of a restoration that would never come, growing bitter and small as the universe changed around them. A few had tried violence, sending assassins or saboteurs against the new order. All of them had failed. The galaxy was not perfect. It would probably never be perfect. But it was better than it had been. Ambassador Chun turned away from the window as her assistant entered. The young woman was half Vethkai, half human, one of the first generation born to parents from different species. Such children were still rare, but they existed now. They were proof that the walls between species could fall, that the categories that had divided the galaxy for millennia were not as fixed as everyone had believed. The delegates are assembled, Ambassador. They're ready to begin. Chun nodded, and followed her assistant through the corridors of Station Unity. Beings of every shape and size passed them, going about their business without fear or suspicion. A Drell warrior nodded respectfully as Chun passed. A cluster of chorus individuals paused their conversation to let her through. Two young humans argued cheerfully with a hegemony trader over the price of something neither could pronounce. The assembly hall was the largest chamber on the station, a vast circular space designed to hold representatives from every member species. Today, 47 delegations were present, their seats arranged in concentric rings around a central platform. More species joined every year. Soon there would not be enough room. Chun made her way to the platform and looked out at the assembled delegates. She had given hundreds of speeches in her long career, but this one was different. This was the first Galactic Compact Assembly, the moment when the loose alliance of the past 50 years would become something more permanent. Something that would outlast her, outlast everyone in this room, outlast perhaps even the stars themselves. She took a deep breath and began. 350 years ago, humanity was dying. Our world had been burned. Our people had been slaughtered. Our future had been stolen by those who thought they had the right to decide who would live and who would die. We spent 3 centuries in a cage, forgotten by the galaxy, given up for dead. We could have died. We could have surrendered. We could have accepted that our story was over. We did not. Instead, we learned. We grew. We became stronger than we had ever been before. And when we finally broke free, we faced a choice. We could have used our power to punish those who had hurt us. We could have built our own empire on the ruins of the old. We could have become exactly what we hated. We chose differently. We chose to build instead of destroy, to teach instead of conquer, to offer hope instead of fear. It was not the easy choice. Some of our own people argued against it. They said we had earned the right to revenge. They said mercy was weakness. But we knew something they had forgotten. We knew that the cage we had escaped was not made of metal and machinery. It was made of hate and fear, and the belief that some beings were worth more than others. If we had conquered the galaxy, we would have built that cage again, this time with ourselves as the jailers. So we chose another way. And you chose to join us. She gestured at the assembled delegates, her arm sweeping across the rings of representatives. Look around this room. 50 years ago, many of your species were enemies. Some had fought wars against each other. Some had been slaves and masters. Some had never even known each other existed. Now you sit together. You work together. You are building something together that none of you could have built alone. This is not our achievement. It is not humanity's gift to the galaxy. It is something we all made together, each species contributing what it could, each one learning from the others. The compact we form today is not an empire. It has no emperor. It has no master species. It is a promise that we will work together, protect each other, and resolve our conflicts with words instead of weapons. A promise that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated. Some will say this is naive. They will say that peace cannot last, that the strong will always prey on the weak, that the galaxy will eventually return to its old ways. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps this dream will fail, but perhaps it will not. Perhaps the children being born today, the children who have never known war or slavery or cages, will grow up believing that cooperation is normal. Perhaps their children will believe it even more strongly. Perhaps, generation by generation, the old hatreds will fade and the new ways will take root. This is the bet we are making. This is the future we are building. Not with weapons or threats, but with trust and patience and the belief that beings are capable of being better than they have been. She paused, her eyes moving across the assembly one final time. Humanity was quiet for 3 centuries. We will never be quiet again. But the voice we raise now is not a voice of war. It is a voice of welcome to every species in this galaxy. Whether you sit in this room today or not, we say, you are not alone. You do not have to struggle by yourselves. You do not have to fear the darkness. Come, join us. Build with us. The cage is broken. The night is over. This is the new dawn. The chamber erupted in sound applause and cheers and cries in 47 different languages, all blending together into a single voice. Delegates rose from their seats, reaching toward each other across the gaps that had once divided them. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin watched it all with tears in her eyes. 350 years. 3 centuries of darkness, followed by 50 years of building. She had been born into a galaxy of fear and hatred, and she would die in a galaxy of hope. It was enough. It was more than enough. The new dawn had come.